Live from the BDN Studios, it's Bang and Dang.
That's awesome.
If you don't like that, then
You ain't black.
All right, welcome back to Battles of the American Civil War. Behind the Battles, got another one coming for you. Figured instead of doing another person profile, we'll get to some actual behind the battles, behind the war stuff again with the Trent Affair, which I bet you a lot of people don't even know that the United States and England, Great Britain, almost got into another war during the Civil War here. All due to some Confederate ships being claimed from a Royal Mail steamer. They captured 2 envoys, they did. And the government protested vigorously, supposedly.
All right.
So, yeah, American public and elite opinion strongly supported the seizure, but it worsened the economy and was ruining relations with the world's strongest economy and strongest navy. And there was no way we could fight a war amongst ourselves and go up against Great Britain again. So, yeah, so it's actually a pretty lengthy one of what happened behind the scenes, and it took a little while to work it out. So, the old Trent Affair, 1861, this happened. Can you imagine that? Being in war with Britain? They would have certainly taken the Confederate side. We would be the Confederacy right now. Well,
most likely, yeah.
Well, and then no Mexicans would have ever came in. Oh, jeez. Relations with the United States were often strained and even verged on war when Britain came near to supporting the Confederacy in the early part of the war. British leaders were constantly annoyed from the 1840s to the 60s by what they saw as Washington's pandering to the mob,
Right.
as in the Oregon boundary dispute of 1844 to 46. These tensions came to a head during the Trent Affair. This time, London, they draw the line. They said, enough is enough. You guys think because you beat us and tied us in the War of 1812, we're just going to sit back?
Right. Wow. The Confederate States believed from the beginning that European dependence on Southern cotton for its textile industry would lead to diplomatic recognition and intervention, which they thought, like, hey, man, somebody's got to help us. In the form of mediation, they thought at least Europe or Britain would be like, hey, guys.
Somebody coming down and help us do a treaty.
Right, you guys can split off here and we'll figure stuff out. But that never happened.
No.
Historian Charles Hubbard, he wrote this. President Davis left foreign policy to others in government, and rather than developing an aggressive diplomatic effort, tended to expect events to accomplish diplomatic objectives. The new president was committed to the notion that cotton would secure recognition, legitimacy from powers of Europe.
He's like, let's let our actions speak louder than our words, apparently.
Right.
But little did he know, there's other people producing cotton in this world there, buddy.
Yeah.
One of the Confederacy's strongest hopes at the time was the belief that British, fearing devastating impact on their textile mills, would recognize the Confederate States and break the Union blockade.
Well, it didn't happen.
The men Davis selected as Secretary of State and emissaries to Europe were chosen for political and personal reasons, not for their diplomatic potential.
Yeah.
This was due in part to the belief that cotton would accomplish the Confederate objectives with little help from Confederate diplomats. That's why Jefferson sucked.
Yeah, put all his eggs in one basket. Can't do that. You know, spread them around, boys. The old blue coats' main focus in foreign affairs was just the opposite. They wanted to prevent any British recognition of the Confederacy. The issues of the Oregon boundary dispute, British involvement in Texas, the Canada-U.S. border dispute had all been resolved in the 40s. And despite the Pig War of 1859, a minor border incident in the Pacific Northwest, Anglo-American relations had steadily improved throughout the 1850s. Secretary of State William Seward, the primary architect of the American foreign policy during the war, he intended to maintain the policy principles that had served the country well since the American Revolution, which was non-intervention by the United States in the affairs of other countries. Hey.
Who would have thought?
And resistance to foreign intervention in the affairs of the United States. And other countries in the Western Hemisphere.
Yeah, it's still got to protect our interests over here, man.
Right. So we're gonna help. We're gonna be nosy with Canada and Mexico.
Right. I mean, yeah, there's our borders. British Prime Minister Lord Palmerston urged a policy of neutrality. His international concerns were centered in Europe, where both Napoleon III's ambitions in Europe and Bismarck's rise in Prussia were occurring.
Yeah, he had to worry about Prussia.
That's crazy. During the War of 1812, they were fighting Napoleon for the French Revolution stuff. And then Napoleon III comes along, and they're like, we can't get in another thing.
Right.
That's one of the reasons. That's actually one of the reasons why the United States lost, or, I mean, It was kind of a tie, but that's the only reason why it happened like that, because Britain was fighting most of their shit against Napoleon at that time.
Right.
They probably would have stomped us.
Oh, for sure.
But
What, the War of 1812?
Yes.
Oh, all day, dude.
they already burned the damn White
They
House.
burned the whole East Coast down.
Right. Yeah, during the Civil War, British reactions to American events were shaped by past British policies and their own national interests, both strategically and economically. In the Western Hemisphere, as relations with the United States improved, Britain had become cautious about confronting the United States over issues in Central America.
Right.
Yeah, even back then, Americans still just
Right.
stay out of other people's countries, bro. Jeez.
As a naval power, Britain had a long record of insisting that neutral nations honor its blockades of hostile countries. From the earliest days of the war, that perspective would guide the British away from taking any action that might have been viewed in Washington as a direct challenge to the Union blockade.
Hey, you can't expect people to acknowledge your blockades, and then you want to come and mess with other people's stuff.
Right. From the perspective of the South, British policy amounted to de facto support for the Union blockade and caused great frustration. What do you think was going to happen?
Poor guys. Jeez. The Russian minister in Washington, Edward de Stockel, he noted that the Cabinet of London is watching attentively the internal dissensions of the Union and awaits the result with an impatience which it has difficulty in disguising.
Right.
De Stockel advised his government that Britain would recognize the Confederate States at its earliest opportunity.
Right. They were just waiting.
They were wanting to, yeah. Cassius Clay, the U.S. minister in Russia, he stated, "I saw at a glance where the feeling of England was. They hoped for our ruin. They are jealous of our power. They care neither for the South nor the North.
Right.
They hate both."
Right, but they wanted the South win because they thought they could bully the South if they were to break off into two countries, and Britain would have more power in the South, potentially bringing in Britain from the South up for another war. I bet that's exactly what it was.
Doubt they were thinking another war, but at least, yeah, to control the South for sure. And the cotton trade, and a little piece of that.
Oh, dude, that one, yeah. At the very beginning of the Civil War, the United States minister to the court of St. James was Charles Francis Adams. He made clear that Washington considered the war strictly an internal insurrection, affording the Confederacy no rights under international law. Any movement by Britain toward officially recognizing the Confederacy would be considered an unfriendly act towards the U.S. Seward's instructions to Adams included the suggestion that it made clear to Britain that a nation with widely scattered possessions as well as a homeland that included Scotland and Ireland should be very wary of setting a dangerous precedent. Oh, okay.
Lord Lyons, an experienced diplomat, was the British minister to the U.S. He warned London about Seward. He said, "I cannot help fearing that he will be a dangerous foreign minister." His view of the relations between the United States and Great Britain had always been that they are a good material to make political capital of.
Right.
I do not think Mr. Seward would contemplate actually going to war with us, but he would be well disposed to play the old game of seeking popularity here by displaying violence towards us.
Mm-hmm.
Despite his distrust of Seward, Lyons, throughout 1861, he maintained a calm and measured diplomacy that contributed to a peaceful resolution to the crisis we're about to learn here.
Well, let's hope so, right? The Trent Affair did not erupt as a major crisis until late November 1861. The first link in the chain of events occurred in February of 1861, when the Confederacy created a three-person European delegation consisting of William Lowndes Yancey, Pierre Rost, and Ambrose Dudley Mann. Their instructions from the Confederate Secretary of State Robert Toombs were to explain to these governments the nature and the purposes of the Southern cause, to open diplomatic relations, and to negotiate treaties of friendship, commerce, and navigation. Hey, man, we just want to be friends.
Man.
We want to be able to buy and sell stuff, and we just want to get through if we need to go to, like, France or something. Can we get through that little channel right there?
We want to keep our slaves. Can you help us?
They're like, no, we abolished those 100 years ago.
Well, Toombs's instructions included a long legal argument on states' rights and the right of secession. Because of the reliance on the double attack of cotton and legality, many important issues were absent from the instructions, including the blockade of southern ports, privateering, trade with the North, slavery, and the informal blockade the Southerners had imposed whereby no cotton was being shipped out. What are they trying to... why didn't he try his hand? Or is that what they're saying there? We're not going to ship you no cotton no matter what, even around the blockades if you don't recognize us or help us or something.
Pretty much. Right. They're trying to use that as a leverage, and it's not going to work. British leaders and those on the continent generally believed that the division of the U.S. was inevitable. Remembering their own unsuccessful attempt to keep their former American colonies in the empire by force of arms, the British considered Union efforts to resist a fait accompli to be unreasonable. But they also viewed Union resistance as a fact that they had to deal with. Believing the war's outcome to be predetermined, the British saw any action they could take to encourage the end of the war as a humanitarian gesture. Right. Lyons was instructed by Foreign Secretary Lord Russell to use his own office and any other parties who might promote a settlement of the war.
He's like, the Union's it's gonna tear them apart for a couple of years. Union's gonna come on top. We already know what's gonna happen.
Right.
The commissioners, they met informally with Russell May 3rd. Although word of Fort Sumter had just reached London, the immediate implications of open warfare were not discussed at the meeting. Instead, the envoys emphasized the peaceful intent of their new nation and the legality of secession as a remedy to the northern violations of states' rights. They closed with their strongest argument, the importance of cotton to Europe.
Oh, wow. Well, slavery was only discussed when Russell asked Yancey whether the international slave trade would be reopened by the Confederacy, a position Yancey had advocated in recent years. Yancey's reply was that it was not part of the Confederacy's agenda. Russell was non-committal, promising the matters raised would be discussed with the full cabinet.
Well, I'm not gonna say we're not gonna be slave trading anymore, but you never know.
I'm not going to say that we are. In the meantime, the British were attempting to determine what official stance they should have to the war. 13th of May, 1861. Recommendation of Russell. Queen Victoria issued a declaration of neutrality that served as recognition of Southern belligerency, a status that provided Confederate ships the same privileges in foreign ports that the U.S. ships had received.
Same.
Like, we're going to treat you guys all the same right now.
We realize you guys are in a war.
Right.
You're claiming your own country. You're a belligerent.
All right.
Officially.
Right.
Well, Confederate ships could obtain fuel, supplies, and repairs in neutral ports, but could not secure military equipment or arms. Yeah. The availability of Britain's far-flung colonial ports made it possible for Confederate ships to pursue Union shipping throughout much of the world. France, Spain, Netherlands, and Brazil, they followed suit. Belligerency also gave the Confederate government the opportunity to purchase supplies, contract with British companies, and purchase a navy to search out and seize Union ships.
Oh. Perfect.
The Queen's proclamation made clear that the Britons were prohibited from joining the military of either side, equipping any ships for military use in the war, breaking any proper blockade, and from transporting military goods, documents, or personnel to either side.
Fantastic.
Okay.
There you go.
They can use their ports, get all their shit they need, but we're not helping them militarily.
You should take note, France. 18th of May, Adams met with Russell to protest the Declaration of Neutrality. Adams argued that Great Britain had recognized a state of belligerency before they had ever shown their capacity to maintain any kind of warfare or whatever, except within one of their own harbors under every possible advantage. It considered them a maritime power before they had ever exhibited a single privateer upon the ocean. So they're saying we're quick to acknowledge these guys.
They've shown that they haven't even shown that they can actually fight.
Right. The major United States concern at this point was that the recognition of belligerency was the first step towards diplomatic recognition. So.
Well, while Russell indicated that recognition was not currently being considered, he would not rule it out in the future, although he did agree to notify Adams if the government's position changed.
Okay.
I would hope so. Meanwhile, in Washington, Seward was upset with both the proclamation of neutrality and Russell's meetings with the Confederates. In a May 21st letter to Adams, which he instructed Adams to share with the British, Seward protested the British reception of the Confederate envoys and ordered Adams to have no dealings with the British as long as they were meeting with them.
Oh, wow.
You guys meet with the Confederates, we want nothing to do with you.
All right. Formal recognition would make Britain an enemy of the United States. President Lincoln reviewed the letter, softened the language, and told Adams not to give Russell a copy, but to limit himself to quoting only those portions that Adams thought appropriate. Adams, in turn, was shocked by even the revised letter, feeling that it almost amounted to a threat to wage war against all of Europe. Well, when he met with Russell on the 12th of June, after receiving the dispatch, Adams was told that Great Britain had often met with representatives of rebels against nations that Great Britain was at peace with, but they had no further intention of meeting with the Confederate mission.
Further problems developed over possible diplomatic recognition when in mid-August, Seward became aware that Britain was secretly negotiating with the Confederacy in order to obtain its agreement to abide by the Declaration of Paris. The 1856 declaration prohibited signatories from commissioning privateers against other signatories, protected neutral goods shipped to belligerents except for contrabands of war, and recognized blockades only if they were proved effective. The United States had failed to sign the treaty originally, but after the Union declared a blockade of the Confederacy, Seward ordered that Britain and France to reopen negotiations to restrict the Confederate use of privateers.
18th of May, 1861, Russell had instructed Lyons to seek Confederate agreement to abide by the Paris Declaration. Lyons assigned this task to Robert Bunch, the British consul in Charleston, South Carolina, who was directed to contact South Carolina Governor Francis Wilkinson Pickens. Bunch exceeded his instructions. He bypassed Pickens, openly assured the Confederates that agreement to the Paris Declaration was the first step to British recognition. His indiscretion soon came to Union ears. Robert Muir, British-born Charleston merchant, was arrested in New York. Well, he was a colonel in the South Carolina militia. He had a British diplomatic passport issued by Bunch, and he was carrying a British diplomatic pouch, which was searched. The pouch contained some actual correspondence from Bunch to Britain, and also pro-Confederate pamphlets, personal letters from Southerners to European correspondents, and a Confederate dispatch which recounted Bunch's dealings with the Confederacy, including the talk of recognition. Son of a bitch.
When confronted, Russell admitted that his government was attempting to get agreement from the Confederacy to adhere to the provisions of the treaty relating to the neutral goods, but not privateering.
Right.
But he denied that this was in any way a step towards extending diplomatic relations to the Confederates. Rather than reacting to what he did to the earlier recognition of belligerency, Seward let this matter drop. He did demand, though, Bunch's recall, but Russell refused.
Well, let's go on to see what France got to say about this. Under Napoleon III, France's overall foreign policy objectives were at odds with Britain's, obviously, but France generally took positions regarding the Civil War combatants similar as well, and often supportive of Britain's. Cooperation between Britain and France was begun in the United States between Henry Mercier, the French minister, and also with Lyons. For example, 15th of June, 1861, they tried to see Seward together regarding the proclamation of neutrality. But Seward insisted that he meet with them separately.
Yeah, he wanted to get in each of their ears.
Edouard Thouvenel was the French foreign minister for all of 1861 until the fall of 1862. So a year and a half.
Damn.
Year and three-quarter.
Why did 1862 fall? Well, he was generally perceived to be pro-Union and was influential in dampening Napoleon III's initial inclination towards diplomatic recognition of the Confederates. Thouvenel, he met unofficially with Confederate envoy Pierre Rost in June and told him not to expect diplomatic recognition. William Dayton of New Jersey was appointed by Lincoln as U.S. Minister to France. He had no foreign affairs experience and didn't even speak French, but was assisted a great deal by the U.S. Consul General in Paris, who was John Bigelow.
All right, that makes sense. When Adams made his protest to Russell on the recognition of Confederate belligerency, Dayton made a similar protest to Thouvenel. Napoleon, he offered his good office to the United States in resolving the conflict with the South, and Dayton was directed by Seward to acknowledge that if any mediation were at all admissible, it would be his own that he would seek or accept.
Okay. When the news of the Confederate victory at the First Bull Run reached Europe, it reinforced British opinion that the Confederate independence was inevitable. Oh, they thought they were going to get independence. Even at the beginning, apparently.
Right.
Hoping to take advantage of this battlefield success, Yancey requested a meeting with Russell, but was rebuffed and told that any communication should be in writing.
They're like, we've seen this before, guys.
Right. Yancey then submitted a long letter on August 14th, detailing again the reasons why the Confederacy should receive formal recognition, and he requested another meeting with Russell. Russell's August 24th reply, directed to the commissioners of the so-styled Confederate States of America, it reiterated the British position that it considered the war as an internal matter rather than a war for independence.
Oh,
really?
British policy would change only if the fortune of arms or the more peaceful mode of negotiation shall have determined the respective positions of the two belligerents.
Basically, you're going to beat the shit out of one side, and they're going to take your side.
Right. No meeting was scheduled, and this was the last communication between the British government and the Confederate envoys. When the Trent Affair erupted in November and December, the Confederacy had no effective way to communicate directly with Great Britain, and they were left totally out of the negotiation process.
By August 1861, Yancey was sick, frustrated, and ready to resign.
Right.
In that same month, President Davis had decided that he needed diplomats in Britain and France, specifically ministers that would be better suited to serve as Confederate ministers, should the Confederacy achieve international recognition. I would assume so. He selected John Slidell of Louisiana and James Mason of Virginia. Both men were widely respected throughout the South and had some background in foreign affairs. Slidell had been appointed as a negotiator by President Polk at the end of the Mexican-American War, or the Mexican War. Mason had been chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee from 1847 to 60.
R.M.T. Hunter of Virginia was the new Confederate Secretary of State. His instructions to Mason and Slidell were to emphasize the stronger positions of the Confederacy now that it had expanded from 7 to 11 states, with the likelihood of Maryland, Missouri, and Kentucky, who would also eventually join the new nation. An independent Confederacy would restrict the industrial and maritime ambitions of the United States and lead to a mutually beneficial commercial alliance between Great Britain, France, and the Confederate States, which it probably would have.
Maybe. A balance of power would be restored in the Western Hemisphere as the United States' territorial ambitions would be restricted. They were to liken the Confederate situation to Italy's struggles for independence, which Britain had supported, and were, to quote Russell's own letters, which justified that support. Of immediate importance, they were to make a detailed argument against the legality of the Union blockade. Along with their formal written instructions, Mason and Slidell carried a number of documents supporting their positions.
The intended departure of the envoys was no secret. The Union government received daily intelligence on their movements. By the 1st of October, 1861, Slidell and Mason were in Charleston, South Carolina. Their original plan was to run the blockade in CSS Nashville, a fast steamer, and sail directly to Britain. But the main channel into Charleston was guarded by 5 Union ships. Nashville's draft was too deep for any side channels. A night escape was considered, but tides and strong night winds prevented this. An overland route through Mexico and departure from Matamoros was also considered, but the delay of several months was unacceptable.
Right.
I mean, I would have took that delay of several months because the war lasted 4.5 years. By the time you get it, would have worked.
Maybe. The steamer Gordon was suggested as an alternative. She had a shallow enough draft to use the back channels and could make over 12 knots, more than enough to elude the Union pursuit. Gordon was offered to the Confederate government either as a purchase for $62,000.
Was it big enough to sail the Atlantic, though?
Yeah, it was offered for the Confederates to purchase for $62,000 or as a charter for $10,000. Confederate Treasury could not afford this, but a local cotton broker, George Trenholm, he paid the $10,000 in return for half the cargo space on the return trip.
Okay.
He said, all right, I'll go over there. Let's bring some spices and shit back.
Yeah, baby.
That Britain already stole from India.
Yeah.
Renamed Theodora. The ship left because it's a military.
Right.
The ship left Charleston at 1 a.m. October 12th and successfully evaded Union ships enforcing the blockade.
Oh, look at that shit. On the 14th of October, 1861, she arrived at Nassau in the Bahamas.
Oh, shit.
But had missed connections with a British steamer going to St. Thomas in the Danish West Indies, the main point of the departure for British ships from the Caribbean to the Britain. They discovered that British mail ships might be anchored in Spanish Cuba. And Theodora turned southwest towards Cuba. Theodora appeared off the coast of Cuba on 15th October, with her coal bunkers nearly empty. An approaching Spanish warship hailed Theodora. Slidell and George Eustis Jr. went aboard and were informed that British mail packets docked at Havana, but that the last one had just left, and the next one, the paddle steamer RMS Trent, would arrive in 3 weeks.
You got no choice but to wait for that 3 weeks now, boys.
Yeah, I would say.
And Theodora then docked in Cardenas, Cuba on October 16th, and Mason and Slidell disembarked. The two men decided to stay in Cardenas before making an overland trip to Havana to catch the next British ship. Meanwhile, rumors reached the federal government that Mason and Slidell had escaped aboard Nashville. Oh, that's wrong. Union intelligence had not immediately recognized that Mason and Slidell had left Charleston on Theodora instead. U.S. Navy Secretary Gideon Welles reacted to the rumor that Mason and Slidell had escaped from Charleston by ordering Admiral Samuel DuPont to dispatch a fast warship to Britain to intercept the Nashville.
15th October, Union sidewheel steamer USS James Adger, under the command of John Marchand, began steaming towards Europe with orders to pursue Nashville to the English Channel if necessary. James Adger reached Britain and docked in Southampton Harbor in early November. The British government was aware that the United States would attempt to capture the envoys and believed they were on Nashville.
Oh, the British government did too, huh?
Wow. Palmerston ordered a Royal Navy warship to patrol within the 3-mile limit around Nashville's expected port of call to assure that any capture would occur outside British territorial waters. Okay.
Well, this would avoid the diplomatic crisis that would result if the James Adger would get to Nashville in British waters.
Yeah, you can't do that.
When the Nashville did arrive, November 21st, the British were surprised that the envoys were not on board.
Ooh.
The Union steam frigate, USS San Jacinto, commanded by Captain Charles Wilkes, arrived in St. Thomas October 13th. The San Jacinto had cruised off the African coast for nearly a month before setting course westward with orders to join a U.S. Navy force preparing to attack Port Royal, South Carolina. In St. Thomas, Wilkes learned that the Confederate raider CSS Sumter had captured 3 U.S. merchant ships near Cienfuegos in July.
Wilkes, he began to head there, despite the unlikelihood that Sumter would have remained in the area. In Cienfuegos, he learned from a newspaper that Mason and Slidell were scheduled to leave Havana on the 7th of November.
Oh, jeez.
In the British mail packet RMS Trent, bound first for St. Thomas and then England. He realized that the ship would need to use the narrow Bahama Channel, the only deep water route between Cuba and the shallow Grand Bahama Bank.
Wilkes discussed legal options with his second-in-command, Lieutenant D.M. Fairfax. Then he reviewed law books on the subject before making plans to intercept. He's like, what do we do?
Right.
Wilkes adopted the position that Mason and Slidell would qualify as contraband, subject to seizure by a United States ship. Historians have concluded that there was no legal precedence for the seizure. This aggressive decision-making was typical of Wilkes' command style. On one hand, he was recognized as a distinguished explorer, author, and naval officer. On the other, he had a reputation as a stubborn, overzealous, impulsive, and sometimes even insubordinate asshole.
Oh, wow. What a dink.
Yeah.
Treasury Officer George Harrington had warned Seward about Wilkes. He will give us trouble. He has a superabundance of self-esteem and a deficiency of judgment. When he commanded his great exploring mission, he court-martialed nearly all of his officers. He alone was right. Everybody else was wrong.
My way or the seaway, baby.
Right. Walk the plank, bitch. Trent left on the 7th of November, 1861, as scheduled, with Mason and Slidell, their secretaries, Slidell's wife, and children aboard. Just as Wilkes has predicted, Trent passed through Bahama Channel, where San Jacinto was awaiting them. Like, hey.
Oh, shit. Around noon, November 8th, lookouts aboard the San Jacinto spotted Trent, which unfurled the Union Jack as it neared. San Jacinto then fired a shot across the bow of Trent, which Captain James Moore of the Trent ignored. San Jacinto then fired its second shot from her forward pivot gun, which landed right in front of Trent. Oh, come on. Trent stopped after the second shot. Lieutenant Fairfax was summoned to the quarterdeck, where Wilkes presented him with the following written instructions. On boarding her, you will demand the papers of the steamer, her clearance from Havana, with the list of passengers and crew. Should Mr. Mason, Mr. Slidell, Mr. Eustis, and Mr. McFarland be on board, make them prisoners and send them on board this ship and take possession of her as a prize. The Trent. They must be brought aboard. All trunks, cases, packages, and bags belonging to them you will take possession of and send on board this ship. Any dispatches found on the persons of the prisoners or in possession of those on board the steamer will be taken as possession of, examined, and retained if necessary. They're saying, get over here.
Right.
Man, they said they were going to take the Trent.
Damn. Well, Fairfax then boarded Trent from a cutter. 2 cutters carrying a party of 20 men, armed with pistols and cutlasses, sidled up to the Trent. Fairfax, certain that Wilkes was creating an international incident and not wanting to enlarge its scope, ordered his armed escort to remain in the cutter. Upon boarding, Fairfax is escorted to an outraged Captain Moore and announced that he had orders to arrest Mr. Mason and Mr. Slidell and their secretaries and send them prisoners on board the United States war vessel nearby.
The crew and passengers then threatened Lieutenant Fairfax, and the armed party in the 2 cutters besides Trent responded to the threats by climbing aboard to protect him. Captain Moore refused Fairfax's request for a passenger list, but Slidell and Mason came forward and identified themselves. Moore also refused to allow a search of the vessel for contraband. Fairfax failed to force the issue, which would have required seizing the ship as a prize, arguably an act of war.
Right.
Mason and Slidell made a formal refusal to go voluntarily with Fairfax, but did not resist when Fairfax crewmen escorted them to the cutter anyways. They said, all right, man, we don't want to... We're going to screw up everything here. Actually, they might have talked amongst themselves. This is brilliant.
Right.
Look at what the Union's doing. This might make Britain even side with us faster because of this.
Right. Wilkes would later claim that he believed that Trent was carrying highly important dispatches and were endowed with instructions inimical to the United States. Along with the failure of Fairfax to insist on the search of Trent, there was another reason why no papers were found in the luggage that was carried with the envoys. Mason's daughter, writing in 1906, said that the Confederate dispatch bag had been secured by Commander Williams, R.N., a passenger on Trent, and later delivered to the Confederate envoys in London. Oh, look at that. So it worked out.
Well, yeah, but he demanded search of everybody that If they found anything on anybody, they would take it. So, but obviously they didn't let them search.
Right.
This was a clear violation of the Queen's neutrality proclamation. International law required that when contraband was discovered on a ship would be taken to the nearest prize court for adjudication. While this was Wilkes' initial determination, Fairfax argued against this, since transferring crew from the San Jacinto to Trent would leave San Jacinto dangerously undermanned, and it would seriously inconvenience Trent's other passengers as well as mail recipients.
Right.
We got mail going over there. We got other people that are going over there. Your ship's probably going to float away because you don't have enough men on it. Come on, man.
I mean, we came and got who we wanted.
Right.
Wilkes, whose ultimate responsibility it was, agreed the ship was allowed to proceed to St. Thomas, absent the 2 Confederate envoys and their secretaries. San Jacinto arrived in Hampton Roads, Virginia, on November 15th, where Wilkes wired news of capture to Washington. He was then ordered to Boston, where he delivered the captives to Fort Warren, a prison for the captured Confederates.
Most Northerners learned of the Trent capture on November 16th when the news hit afternoon newspapers. By Monday the 18th, the press seemed universally engulfed in a massive wave of chauvinistic elation. Everyone was eager to present a legal justification for the capture. Many newspapers argued for the legality of Wilkes' actions, and numerous lawyers stepped forward to add their approval. Harvard law professor Theophilus Parsons, he defended the action, as did Caleb Cushing, who was a former attorney general, and many other legal experts. And they're treasonous.
2nd of December, 1861, Congress passed unanimously a resolution thanking Wilkes for his brave and adroit and patriotic conduct in the arrest and detention of the traitors, James Mason and John Slidell, and proposing that he receive a gold medal with suitable emblems and devices in testimony of high sense entertained by Congress of his good conduct. But as the matter was given closer study, experts began to have doubts. Secretary of Navy Gideon Welles reflected the ambiguity that many felt when he wrote to Wilkes of the emphatic approval of the Navy Department of his actions, while cautioning him that the failure to take the Trent to a prize court must by no means be permitted to constitute a precedent hereafter for the treatment of any case of similar infraction of neutral obligations.
Right, saying you should have took the Trent to a nearby court.
Right, everything you needed.
And this will not be a precedent hereafter where whatever happened here, we're not going to allow again, basically. November 24th, the New York Times claimed to find no actual on-point precedent. Thurlow Weed's Albany Even Journal suggests that if Wilkes had exercised an unwarranted discretion, our government will properly disavow the proceedings and grant England every satisfaction consistent with honor and justice. It did not take long for others to comment that the capture of Mason and Slidell very much resembled the search and impressment practices that the United States had always opposed since its founding, and which previously led to the War of 1812 in Britain. With Britain. The idea of humans as contraband failed to strike a resonant chord with many. Right, like we're supposed to be fighting against this, and we just said somebody was a property?
Right. Leaders, they also started to realize that the issue might be resolved less on legalities and more on the necessity of avoiding a serious conflict with Britain.
Yeah, we don't care how legal it is, because Britain's going to be pissed, probably.
Right. Elder statesman James Buchanan.
I mean, you shot at one of their damn ships, dude.
Right. Elder statesmen James Buchanan, Thomas Ewing, Lewis Cass, and Robert Walker all publicly came out for the necessity of releasing them. By the third week of December, much of the editorial opinion started to mirror these opinions and prepare the American citizens for the release of the prisoners. Yeah, you got to do it. Sorry. The opinion that Wilkes had operated without orders and had erred by, in effect, holding a prize court on the deck of the San Jacinto was being spread. He was like, yeah, you can't do that, bud.
The United States was initially very reluctant to back down. Seward had lost the initial opportunity to immediately release the 2 envoys as an affirmation of a long-held U.S. interpretation of international law. He had written to Adams at the end of November that Wilkes had not acted under instructions, but would hold back any more information until it had received some type of response from Great Britain. He reiterated that recognition of the Confederacy would likely lead to war, though. Damn, dude, that's crazy. We got tensions just rising. No wonder why Lincoln went from smooth face to dude's face been underwater for got all wrinkled.
Lincoln, he was at first enthused about the capture and reluctant to let him go. But as reality set in, he stated, I fear the traitors will prove to be white elephants.
Yeah, you don't want white elephants.
We must stick to American principles concerning the rights of neutrals. We fought Great Britain for insisting on the right to do precisely what Captain Wilkes has done. It's true. If Great Britain shall now protest against the act and demand their release, we must give them up, apologize for the act as a violation of our doctrines, and thus forever bind her over to keep the peace in relation to neutrals, and so acknowledge that she has been wrong for 60 years. Ooh, we can't do that.
Right.
No.
December 4th, Lincoln met with Alexander Galt, who was the future Canadian Minister of Finance. Lincoln told him that he had no desire for troubles with England or any unfriendly designs towards Canada. When Galt asked specifically about the Trent incident, Lincoln replied, "Oh, that'll be got along with. Don't worry about it." Galt forwarded his account of the meeting to Lyons, who forwarded it to Russell. Galt wrote that, despite Lincoln's assurances, "I cannot, however, divest my mind of the impression that the policy of the American government is so subject to popular impulses that no assurance can be or ought to be relied on under present circumstances."
Right.
You can't do that. This is basically saying, I can't believe they're so stupid.
Right. Oh.
Wow.
Lincoln's annual message to Congress did not touch directly on the Trent Affair, but relying on estimates from Secretary of War Simon Cameron that the U.S. could field a 3 million man army, he stated that he could show the world that while engaged in quelling disturbances at home, we're able to protect ourselves from abroad. I mean, you got to be able to do that. Everybody right now is...
Everybody's licking their chops right now. Like,
Looking
dude, there's so many opportunities to come in and do something here.
Finance also played a role. Treasury Secretary Salmon P. Chase were concerned with any events that might affect America's interest in Europe. Chase, he was very aware of the intent of New York banks to suspend gold payments, and he would later make a lengthy argument to the cabinet in support of Seward.
Oh, he felt the release of Mason and Slidell was very annoying, but it was necessary to support the economy.
All right.
Warren concludes that the diplomatic crisis worsened the financial crisis.
Yeah.
December 15th, the first news on British reaction reached the United States. Britain, they first learned of the events on November 27th. Lincoln, he was with Senator Orville Browning when Seward brought in the first newspaper dispatches, which indicated Palmerston was demanding a release of the prisoners and an apology. Browning, he thought the threat of war by Britain was foolish, but said, "We will fight her to the death."
Ooh, again.
We're supposed to have diplomatic relations with these guys. Why are we learning through newspapers from England what
Right.
he said? Why wouldn't the king or the prime minister guy send over something to Lincoln?
Stupid.
What is up with that?
Wow. That very night, at a diplomatic reception, Seward was overheard by William H. Russell saying, "We will wrap the whole world in flames."
Good Lord.
The mood in Congress had also changed. When they debated the issue on the 16th December and the 17th, Clement Vallandigham, a peace Democrat, since when, proposed a resolution stating that the U.S. maintained the seizure as a matter of honor.
Oh, geez. Oh, yeah. Sounds real peaceful there, Vallandigham.
The motion was opposed and referred to a committee by the vote of 109 to 16.
Damn.
The official response of the government still awaited the formal British response, which did not arrive in America.
So newspapers were already reporting
Right.
it. But the formal, for some reason...
Didn't come up until 2
Didn't
days
come
later on the
until-
18th of December, 1861.
Well, when the USS James Adger arrived in Southampton and Commander Marchand learned from the Times that his targets had arrived in Cuba, he reacted to the news by boasting that he would capture the two envoys within sight of the British shore if necessary, even if they were on a British ship.
Ooh, fuck that.
As a result of the concerns raised by Marchand's statements, the British Foreign Office requested a judicial opinion from the three law officers of the Crown, which is the Queen's Advocate, the Attorney General, and the Solicitor General. And they're like, we want to know the legality of capturing the men from a British ship, even if it's out of in international waters and stuff.
Can't do it. The written reply dated November 12th.
Damn.
It declared this.
It took
crazy.
a month.
Yeah,
A
love
month to
that.
get there? Good Lord.
The United States man of war falling in with the British mail steamer beyond the territorial limits of the United Kingdom might cause her to bring to, might board her, examine her papers, open the general mail bags, and examine the contents thereof, without, however, opening any mail bag or packet addressed to any officer or department of Her Majesty's government. So anything that was going, they weren't opening.
Federally, right.
Right. The United States ship of war may put a prize crew on board the West India steamer and carry her off to a port of the United States for adjudication by the prize court there. But she would have no right to move messengers, Mason and Slidell, and carry them off as prisoners, leaving the ship to pursue her voyage.
All right. So you should have done everything that you guys were thinking of doing.
Right.
Take them off. Let's settle this in the courts or at least legally.
Right.
But no, he did some stupid stuff. On November 12th, Palmerston advised Adams in person that the British nonetheless, they would take offense if the envoys were moved from a British ship.
Right.
Palmerston emphasized that seizing the Confederates would be highly inexpedient in every way Palmerston could view it, and a few more Confederates in Britain would not produce any change in policy already adopted. Palmerston questioned the presence of Azure in British waters, and Adams assured Palmerston that he had read Marchand's orders, which limited him to seizing Mason and Slidell from a Confederate ship.
Sounds like a bunch of freaking messed around bullshit here. The news of the actual capture of Mason and Slidell did not arrive in London until 27th of November. Much of the public and many of the newspapers immediately perceived it as an outrageous insult to British honor and a flagrant violation to maritime law. The London Chronicle's response was typical. Mr. Seward is exerting himself to provoke a quarrel with all Europe in that spirit of senseless egotism which induces the Americans, with their dwarf fleet and shapeless mass of incoherent squads,
Good Lord.
which they call an army, to fancy themselves the equal of France by land and Great Britain by sea. Oh, shit. Yeah, they're saying Great Britain is superior by sea, and our army in Americas is not even close to what France has on land, which is probably true.
No army is close to what France has on land at this time.
Damn. They're saying we're a bunch of peons.
Right. Little piss ants running around the lake just did something 60 years ago, and they're still talking about it. Frickin'
Holy shit.
jeez.
Wow.
Well, meanwhile, the London Standard saw the capture as but one of a series of premeditated blows aimed at this country to involve it in a war with the northern states. A letter from an American visitor written to Seward declared, "The people are frantic with rage, and were the country polled, I fear 999 men of 1,000 would declare for immediate war." Contrary to reports of overwhelming pro-Confederate sentiments amongst the British population, Karl Marx, exiled in London at this time, organized with and reported for British workers to publicly voice dissent against British coalition with the Confederacy.
All right.
He says, convinced that the germ of the future revolution lay in the North, Marx supported the Republic in its struggle against the slave oligarchy. In this respect, he had the wholehearted aid of the British proletariat. When, in the latter part of 1861, the reactionary Palmerston government attempted to use the Trent Affair as a pretext for a war against the North, English workers held protest meetings in Brighton and elsewhere. These demonstrations were called in spite of the fact that British ruling classes did everything in their power to make the workers believe that an alliance with the Confederacy would result in the break-in of the northern blockade of southern ports,
Right.
which in turn would mean the importation of greater quantities of cotton, with consequent reemployment and prosperity.
Oh, okay.
Yet the British workers could not be so easily fooled. Despite widespread misery and starvation, why are they starving? Just because they can't get cotton?
Right.
They showed their indestructible excellence by opposing the warmongers and demanding peace.
Okay.
Their pro-union demonstrations forced the Palmerston government to adopt a more conciliatory tone throughout the entire Trent Affair. Marx, in reporting these meetings to his American readers, requested them never to forget that at least the working classes of England were on their side. Yeah, Britain probably did want another war with the Americans.
Oh, of course.
Why wouldn't they at this time?
Right. Well, there was a member of the parliament. He stated that unless America set matters right, the British flag should be torn into shreds and sent to Washington for use of the presidential water closets.
Jeez.
Well, the seizure provoked one anti-union meeting held in Liverpool, later a hub of Confederate sympathy, and it was chaired by the future Confederate spokesman, James Spence. The Times published its first report from the U.S. on December 4th, and its correspondent, W.H. Russell, wrote of American reactions, "There is so much violence of spirit among the lower orders of the people, and they are so saturated with pride and vanity that any honorable concession would prove fatal to its authors." Quote, unquote.
Times editor John T. Delane took a moderate stance and warned the people not to regard the act in the worst light, and to question whether it made sense that the United States, despite British misgivings about Seward that went back to the earliest days of the Lincoln administration, that they would force a quarrel upon the powers of Europe. This restrained stance was common in Britain. The press, as a whole, preached calm and praised it too, noting the general moderation of public temper it perceived. I'm surprised they're not pushing. The press isn't for war.
I don't think they know what the hell is going on. The government got its first solid information on the Trent from Commander Williams, who went directly to London after he arrived in England. He spent several hours with the Admiralty and the Prime Minister. Initial reaction among political leaders was firmly opposed to the American actions. Lord Clarendon, a former Foreign Secretary, expressed that what many felt when he accused Seward of trying to provoke us into a quarrel, and finding that it could not be effected at Washington, he was determined to compass at sea. Okay.
Don't think so.
Yeah.
Resisting Russell's call for an immediate cabinet meeting, Palmerston again called on the law officers to prepare a brief based on the actual events that had occurred, and an emergency cabinet meeting was scheduled 2 days later, Friday, November 29th. Palmerston also informed the War Office that budget reductions scheduled for 1862 should be put on hold. He said, wait a minute, we might need a little bit more of this money here coming up. Russell then met briefly with Adams on November 29th to determine whether he could shed any light on American intent. Adams, he was unaware that Seward had already sent him a letter indicating Wilkes had acted without orders, and was unable to provide Russell any information that might diffuse the situation.
Fantastic. Loving every minute of it.
I bet you that's how a lot of wars escalated or got started. It's because obviously back in the day you got to wait 2 or 3 weeks for a freaking letter to arrive or something, so your actions could be done already.
Done
Crazy.
pissed off and done some shit you can't undo. Then you're fucked. Palmerston, he believed he had received a verbal agreement from Adams that British vessels would not be interfered with. Reportedly began the emergency cabinet meeting by throwing his hat on the table and declaring, I don't know whether you are going to stand this, but I'll be damned if I do. Good for you.
I don't know if I'll be writing.
Where's the biscuits? The law officer's report was read and confirmed that Wilkes' actions were illegal, unjustifiable by international law. The San Jacinto assumed to act as a belligerent, but the Trent was not captured or carried into a port of the United States for adjudication as a prize, and, under the circumstances, cannot be considered as having acted in breach of international law. It follows that from on board a merchant ship of a neutral power, pursuing a lawful and innocent voyage, certain individuals have been taken by force. Her Majesty's government will, therefore, in our opinion, be justified in requiring reparation for the international wrong which has been on this occasion committed. Okay.
All right, we'll give us a little money or something, and we'll call it all good.
A couple loads of cotton.
Right. Well, dispatches from Lyons were given to all in attendance. These dispatches described the excitement in America in support of the capture, referred to the previous dispatches in which Lyons had warned that Seward might provoke such an incident, and described the difficulty that the United States might have in acknowledging that Wilkes had erred. He just said in the letter he sent to you, said he didn't do it under our orders. Lyons also recommended a show of force, including sending reinforcements to Canada. Palmerston indicated to Lord Russell that it was very possible that the entire incident had been a deliberate and premeditated insult designed by Seward to provoke a confrontation with Britain. They really don't like Seward, huh?
Not at all. Several days of discussion. 30th of November, Russell sent to Queen Victoria the drafts of the dispatches intended for Fort Lyons to deliver to Seward. The Queen, in turn, asked her husband and consort, Prince Albert, to review the matter. Although ill with typhoid, that would shortly take his life, Albert read through the dispatches, decided the ultimatum was too belligerent, and composed a softened version.
Well, in his November 30th response to Palmerston, Albert wrote, the Queen should have liked to have seen the expression of a hope in the message to Seward that the American captain did not act under instructions, or, if he did, that he misapprehended them, and that the United States government must be fully aware that the British government could not allow its flag to be insulted, and the security of her mail communications to be placed in jeopardy.
Right.
And that's probably what they're more pissed about. Like, we got a bunch of official shit here.
Right.
Her Majesty's government are unwilling to believe that the United States government intended wantonly to put an insult upon this country and to add to their many distressing complications by forcing a question of dispute upon us, and that we are therefore glad to believe that they would spontaneously offer such redress as alone could satisfy this country, the restoration of the unfortunate passengers, and a suitable apology.
Okay.
That's what they want. Just give us back those guys and say sorry.
Very simple.
What do you think? We're Canadian?
Right. The cabinet incorporated in its official letter to Seward Albert's suggestions that would allow Washington to disavow both Wilkes' action and any American intent to insult the British flag. The British still demanded an apology and the release of the Confederate emissaries. Lyons' private instructions directed him to give Seward 7 days to reply and to close the British legation in Washington and return home if a satisfactory response was not forthcoming. In a further effort to defuse the situation, Russell added his own private note telling Lyons to meet with Seward and advise him of the contents of the official letter before it was actually delivered.
Oh. Well, Lyons was told that as long as the commissioners were released, the British would be rather easy about the apology.
Oh, all right.
And that an explanation sent through Adams would probably be satisfactory. He reiterated that the British would fight if necessary and suggested that the best thing would be if Seward could be turned out, and a rational man put in his place.
Damn.
The dispatches were shipped on December 1st via the Europa, reaching Washington December 18th. Jeez. Like I said, there's could be so much shit that happened in those 17 days, dude.
So much. While military preparations were accelerated, diplomacy would be on hold for the rest of the month while Britain waited for the American response.
You'll get no diplomatic relations with us.
There had been unrest in the British financial market since the news of the Trent was first received.
Why? Was there that much serious mail and shit on that damn boat?
Right. Consoles.
They got the boat back, didn't they?
I think so, yeah.
I mean,
consoles, which had initially declined in value in the early part of the month, fell by another 2%, reaching the level during the first year of the war.
Got their money? Government debt and a perpetual bonds redeeming the first British console. So their banknotes?
Okay, yeah.
Oh, no, they're
bonds.
Government debt issues in the form of perpetual bonds.
Redeeming them at the option of the government.
The United States apparently did it till 1930.
Consoles, which had initially declined in value in the early part of the month, fell by another 2%, reaching the level during the first year of the Crimean War.
Crimean?
Yep. Other securities fell another 4 to 5%. Railway stocks, colonial, foreign securities all declined. The Times noted that the financial markets were reacting as if war were a certainty.
That's what it seems like. They're like, damn.
Well, that's how they do it, too. They start with that financial bullshit, just get everybody on edge.
Right. In the early deliberations over the appropriate British response to the capture of the envoys, there was concern that Napoleon III would take advantage of a Union-British war to act against British interests in Europe or elsewhere.
He would be smart, too.
French and British interests clashed in Indochina and building the Suez Canal in Italy and Mexico. Oh, in building the Suez Canal, also in Italy and in Mexico.
Fantastic.
Palmerston saw French stockpiling of coal in the West Indies, as indicating France was preparing for war with Britain.
Well.
Britain's just nervous.
Right.
The French Navy remained smaller, but had otherwise shown itself equal to the Royal Navy in the Crimean War. A possible buildup of ironclads by the French would present a clear threat in the English Channel.
Yeah, ever since, I can't say Britain got their ass whipped in the Revolutionary War. It was pretty much a tie.
In the Revolutionary War?
Yeah.
Couldn't have been a tie if we won and they retreated and surrendered.
Right, but I'm pretty sure we had more casualties than they did.
Of course we did. It was close until...
Right.
It wasn't.
In the War of 1812, it was obviously more of a British upper hand.
Well, that war only ended due to peace talks.
Right.
It's not like somebody got defeated.
Right. So now Britain's kind of like, man, we're not getting
But you got to remember,
these outcomes that we want. And now we got France and Italy, and they all want some shit, too.
at the end of the 1700s, early 1800s was the French Revolution.
Yeah, so there's a lot of...
Britain has about 100 other territories they probably had defend over the last 100 years.
ridiculous, man. Non-stop warring.
I know.
And then we took over their warring.
Right, every year.
Wow. France, they quickly alleviated many of the Britain's concerns on the 28th of November with no knowledge of the British response or any put from Mercier in the United States. Napoleon met with his cabinet. They had no doubts about the illegality of the United States' actions and agreed to support whatever demands Britain made.
Oh, look at that.
Look at that. Thuvenel, he wrote to Count Charles de Flahaut in London to inform Britain of their decision. After learning of the actual content of the British note, Thuvenel advised the British ambassador, Lord Cowley, that the demand had his complete approval. And on the 4th of December, instructions were sent to Mercier to support Lyons. Uh-oh.
Well, I would assume it's Mercier.
Could be.
Since it's French.
Maybe. Mercier.
Really pumps my ass. A minor stir occurred when the General Winfield Scott Until
the
recently,
Winfield Scott?
yes.
Oh, nice.
Until recently, the commander of all Union troops and Thurlow Weed, a known confidant of Seward, they arrived in Paris. Their mission was to counter the Confederate propaganda efforts with propaganda efforts of their own. It had been determined before the Trent Affair, but the timing was considered odd by Cowley.
Right.
Rumors circulated that Scott was blaming the whole incident on Seward, who had somehow manipulated Lincoln into acquiescing with the seizure.
Right.
They didn't like Seward either, huh?
No one did, and that dude was a fucking prick.
Well, did his job.
Well, Scott ended up putting all those rumors to rest with a December 4th letter that was published in the Paris Constitutional and reprinted throughout Europe, including most London newspapers. This article denied the rumors. Scott stated that every instinct of prudence as well as of good neighborhood prompts our government to regard no honorable sacrifice too great for the preservation of the friendship of Great Britain.
There you go.
Good for you, bud. Quote, unquote. The benign intentions of the United States were also argued by John Bright and Richard Cobden, strong supporters of the United States and also leaders of the Anti-Corn Law League in Britain.
Damn, what you got against corn, Britain?
Anti-Corn Law League, huh?
Well, they're like, they can't grow corn there, so they're like,
cornbread? What? Great Scott! Right.
Well, both had expressed strong reservations about the legality of American actions, but argued strongly that the United States had no aggressive designs against Great Britain.
Right. The United States ain't in no... United States ain't in no position to be fighting war with Great Britain again.
Right. Especially at this time, clearly. Well, Bright publicly disputed that the confrontation had been intentionally engineered by Washington, obviously. In an early December speech to his constituents, he condemned the British military preparations. Before we have made a representation to the American government, before we have heard a word from it in reply, we should be all up in arms. Every sword leaping from its scabbard, and every man looking for his pistols and blunderbusses.
Oh, wow.
What are we doing here?
Right. Dude, the United States is only 80 years old, and they're like the top dog in the world. That's ridiculous. Crazy.
I would argue that this time Britain clearly still is.
Britain's like, man, we've been ruling the ship for 4,000 years. Holy shit. And it takes these guys 80 years to...
I would say after the Civil War and Reconstruction did they really come into.
Right. Cobden joined with Bright by speaking at public meetings and by writing letters to newspapers, organizers of meetings that he could not attend, and influential people in and out of Britain. Okay. So he's getting his word around to everybody, even places he can't be. As time passed on and voices opposing war were heard more and more, the cabinet also began considering alternatives to war, including arbitration. The old arbitration. I mean, win-win, right? Lose-lose sometimes. Lose-win, win-lose. It's arbitrated.
Well, even before the Civil War erupted, Britain, with her worldwide interests, needed to have a military policy regarding the divided United States.
I mean, clearly.
In 1860, Rear Admiral Sir Alexander Milne, he took command of the North America and West Indies Station of the Royal Navy.
All right.
December 22nd, 1860, with secession still in its early stages. Milne's orders were to avoid any measure or demonstration likely to give umbrage to any party in the United States or to bear the appearance of partisanship on either side.
Right.
If the internal dissensions in those states should be carried to the extent of separation.
Basically, what
just make it look like you're not on either
right.
side. You're
and
just here.
basically they're just going to be there ready to pounce if need to be.
Right.
They're just hoping. Let's let them tear each other down to nothing, and we just come in and bam, baby.
Dude, what if Britain was hoping for Confederates to win, and then they would have just came in and invaded the Confederacy because the Union wouldn't have helped?
Well,
or would they have?
Yeah, of course they would have.
Why?
I think so. Because they don't want Britain holding any part of that country. Until May of 1861, in compliance with these instructions, and part of a long-standing policy of the Royal Navy to avoid ports where desertion was likely.
They're like, we're not going towards these ports. Our guys are going to have a hell of a time in that city.
Milne, he avoided the American coast at all cost. In May, the Neutrality Proclamation of May 13th was issued. This increased British concern over the threat of Confederate privateers and Union
privateers,
right, and Union blockading ships to British neutral rights, and Milne was reinforced. The 1st of June, British ports were closed to any naval prizes, a policy that was of great advantage to the Union.
Nice.
Milne, he monitored the effectiveness of the Union blockade, but no effort was to contest its effectiveness, and it was never even attempted to even
Well,
try.
why would you?
Right. And the monitoring was discontinued in November 1861.
Nothing we can do there, bud.
Right.
Well, he then received a letter from Lyons June 14th that said he did not, quote unquote, regard a sudden declaration of war against us by the United States as an event altogether impossible at any moment.
Oh, shit.
Milne then warned his scattered forces, and in a June 27th letter to the Admiralty, asked for further reinforcements and deplored the weakness of the defenses in the West Indies.
All right.
Referring to Jamaica, Milne reported conditions that included works badly contrived and worse executed.
Okay.
Unserviceable guns, decayed gun cartridges.
Oh, son of a bitch.
Corroded shot, the absence of stores of all kinds and of ammunition.
Oh, wow.
With dilapidated and damp powdered magazines.
Wow.
So you can't have any of that.
Oh, son of a bitch. Milne, he made it clear that his existing forces were totally absorbed simply in protecting commerce and defending possessions, mainly inadequately. He had only a single ship available for any special service that may be suddenly required. The Duke of Somerset, the first Lord of the Admiralty, opposed Palmerston's inclination to reinforce Milne. He felt that the existing force, made up largely of steamships, was superior to the primarily sail ships of the Union, and is reluctant to incur additional expenses while Britain was in the process of rebuilding her fleet with iron ships. Yeah, because France was doing that shit too. This resistance by Parliament and the Cabinet led historian Kenneth Bourne to conclude this. When, therefore, the news of the Trent outrage arrived in England, and the British were still not properly prepared for the war, which almost everyone agreed was inevitable if the Union did not back down.
Well, on the land, at the end of March 1861, Britain had 2,100 regular troops in Nova Scotia, 2,200 in the rest of Canada, and scattered posts in British Columbia, Bermuda, and the West Indies.
Why would they not have, like, tens of thousands? I would.
Lieutenant General Sir William Fenwick Williams, all right, William Williams, Billy.
Billy Bill.
He was commander-in-chief of North America, did what he could with his small forces, but he wrote repeatedly to the authorities back in Britain. He said, I need considerable reinforcements to prepare his defenses adequately. They'll run over us. They'll take Canada and hurt me.
Very, very simple. Some land reinforcements were sent in May and also in June. When Palmerston, alarmed by the blockade and the Trent Affair, pressed for increasing the number of regular troops in Canada to 10,000, he was met with resistance. Sir George Cornwall Lewis, head of the War Office, questioned whether there was any real threat to Great Britain.
Right.
Is that really a threat?
He said, we're going to spend all this money sending these thousands of troops over there just for what?
Right.
We're going to have to send them back.
Exactly. He judged it as incredible that any government of ordinary prudence should at a moment of civil war gratuitously increase the number of its enemies and, moreover, incur the hostility of so formidable a power as England. Yeah, he's like, dude, these sons of bitches are ripping each other apart.
Like, do you really think they're purposely going to start some shit with you?
Damn no.
Jeez. In the debate in Parliament, June 21st, there was general opposition to reinforcements based on political, military, and economic arguments. A long-standing issue was the attempt by Parliament to shift more of the burden of Canadian defense to the local government.
All right. Perfect sense.
Colonel Secretary Newcastle, he felt that the requests by Williams were part of a pattern of the last few years in which he had been very fertile of demands and suggestions. So they're saying this guy's like, he's been asking for a lot of fucking shit lately, and we don't like it. Newcastle was also concerned that there were no winter quarters available for additional troops, and he feared desertions would be a serious problem.
Yeah, because it does get cold and a lot of snow, especially in Nova Scotia.
How shitty are you treating your soldiers in the first place that you can't stop at ports that you think they're going to run off from, and then you're like, anything, these guys are going to run away.
Right.
Like, dude, treat your guys better.
Right, sons of bitches. From the very beginning of the Trent crisis, British leaders were well aware that a viable military option was an essential part of defending the nation's interests, obviously. The First Lord of the Admiralty believed Canada could not be defended from a serious attack by the U.S. Of course it couldn't, not with 2,000 troops. And winning it back later would be difficult and costly, as it would have. Bourne also noted, after 1815, the ambiguity of the Anglo-American relations, the parsimony of the House of the Commons, and the enormous practical difficulties involved always seemed to have prevented adequate preparations being made for an Anglo-American war.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Somerset suggested that a naval war as opposed to a ground war. He's like, well, we'll just fight them in the sea, which probably the British would win.
I would assume so. Military preparation began quickly after news of the Trent reached Great Britain. Secretary of War Sir George Lewis proposed within a week to send 30,000 rifles, an artillery battery, and some officers to Canada. He wrote to Lord Palmerston December 3rd. I propose to engage a Cunard steamer and send out 1 regiment and 1 battery of artillery next week, followed as quickly as possible by 3 more regiments and more artillery. Given the realities of the North Atlantic in winter, the reinforcements would have to land in Nova Scotia, since the St. Lawrence River begins to ice up in December.
Russell was concerned that Lewis and Palmerston might take action prematurely that would eliminate what chances for peace that there was. So he requested a small committee to assist Lewis and the Duke of Somerset with their war plans. The group was created and convened on the 9th of December, 1861. The group consisted of Palmerston, Lewis, Somerset, Russell, Newcastle, Lord Granville, Foreign Secretary, and the Duke of Cambridge, Commander-in-Chief of the British Army. Also advised by Earl de Grey, which is Lewis's undersecretary. There was Lord Seaton, a former Commander-in-Chief in Canada. There's General John Fox Burgoyne, the Inspector General of Fortifications. Bunch of pointless names. And Colonel Patrick Leonard MacDougall, the former commander of the Royal Canadian Rifles.
Okay.
A lot of
The
people.
first priority of the committee was Canadian defense, and the committee relied on both plans developed by previous explorations of the issue and information that the committee developed on its own from the testimony of experts.
Okay.
Current resources in Canada consisted of 5,000 regular troops and about an equal number of ill-trained militia, of which only 1/5 were organized.
All right.
During December, the British managed to send 11,000 troops using 18 transport ships. By the end of the month, they were prepared to send an additional 28,400 men. Jeez, they were gearing up for some shit.
Still not enough.
Well, I don't know. The Union Army didn't have... They were only volunteering like 70,000
That's true.
at this time anyways.
This time, right? Then it became like 500,000
Right.
instantly. Ridiculous. By the end of December, everybody done with the Christmas presents, getting ready for the new year. The crisis ended. Reinforcements had raised the count to 924 officers, 17,658 men against an anticipated American invasion from 50 to 200,000,
I mean, it would have been, yeah.
including the units.
It wouldn't have been an invasion if you guys were
Right.
stocking up your shit.
True. Including the units sent overland and the British forces were already in the province of Canada. British field forces in the province would have amounted to 9 infantry battalions, 4 field artillery batteries by mid-March 1862, which is a force equivalent to 3 brigades, and which is 1 division, with 4 infantry battalions and 2 field artillery batteries, the equivalent of 2 more brigades. This would all be split. This would all be split between New Brunswick and Nova Scotia.
There were 12 batteries of garrison artillery, 6 in the province of Canada, 3 in Nova Scotia, 2 in New Brunswick, and 1 in Newfoundland. And 3 companies of engineers in Canada, plus various headquarters, service, and support elements, including 2 battalions of the military train. 5 infantry battalions, 3 field artillery batteries, and 6 garrison artillery batteries moved by sea from Halifax, Nova Scotia, to St. John's, New Brunswick, then overland by sleigh, from St. John to Rivière-du-Loup, province of Canada, between January 1st and March 13th, 1862.
Oh, wow. The 10-day-long overland passage and the railway from Rivière-du-Loup to Ville-du-Quebec was within a day's march of the border. Some locations, the overland trail was almost within rifle shot from U.S. territory in Maine. So the British staff planned on deploying infantry to defend the road if necessary. 96th Regiment, traveling on the Calcutta, reached New Brunswick in February. The other were forced to abandon their voyage in the Azores when their ship, the Victoria, nearly sank. The headquarters staff, who landed in Halifax on the 5th of January, 1862, after the crisis was over, decided to take a quicker route to Montreal. Covering up their military baggage labels to disguise their identities, they took a Cunard steamer to Boston. From there, they caught the railway to Montreal.
Oh, damn.
Look at these guys.
Snuck in through damn America. Jeez.
Damn.
Well, in Canada, General Williams had toured the available forts and fortifications in November and December. Historian Gordon Warren, he wrote that Williams found Forts were either decaying or non-existent, and the amount of necessary remedial work was stupefying.
Oh, let's get stupefied.
To defend Canada, the British government estimated their manpower requirements as 10,000 regulars, 100,000 auxiliary troops, the latter forming garrisons and harassing the enemy's flanks and rear. You guys are going to need a lot.
Canada offered two potential sources of such auxiliary troops. The sedentary militia, which consisted of all Canadian males between 16 and 60.
Damn.
And also volunteer organizations similar to the British Rifle Volunteers. Bourne summed up these two forces as follows. In spite of its proud record, or perhaps because of it, the Canadian militia has been allowed to decline into a mere paper force. Right, nothing there. By law, the entire male population between 18 and 60 was liable for service, but the vast majority of these, the sedentary militia, had no existence beyond enrollment, like the old people. And the only active force, the volunteers, received a mere 6 or 12 days annual training, according to the arm of the service. And of the 5,000 authorized, there were only about 4,422 in June. That's pretty accurate for only some. 4,422 in June of 1861. This is a miserable small force, and many of them but ill-trained, unless greatly improved since last year. Maybe. That was Newcastle's comment. So Newcastle is not happy. He's like, even if these 18 to 60-year-olds, we're only going to be able to use 30% of them.
Well, William's task in raising, arming, and disciplining this army was not dissimilar to the one that the Union and Confederates had faced just at the beginning of this Civil War a year earlier. In the province of Canada, there were 25,000 arms, 10,000 of them smoothbores.
Oh.
And in the Maritimes, there were 13,000 rifles, 7,500 smoothbores. Though weapons, they were readily available in England, the difficulty was transporting them to Canada.
Yeah, that's rough.
30,000 Enfield rifles were sent December 6th with the Melbourne, and by February 10th, 1862, the Times reported that modern arms and equipment for 105,550 people or soldiers, whatever, had arrived in Canada along with 20 million cartridges. Whoa. These guys were ready to do some things.
2nd of December, at Williams's urging, the Canadian government agreed to raise its active volunteer force to 7,500.
Ooh.
The risk of war pushed the number of volunteers to 13,390 by May of 1862. Although the number of efficient volunteers was only 11,940. 20th of December, Williams began training one company of 75 men from each battalion of the sedentary militia, about 38,000 men in total, with the intention of raising to 100,000 men.
Wow.
Okay.
Well, Warren describes a sedentary militia on their initial muster before arms and equipment were served out to them. He says, untrained, undisciplined, they showed up in all manner of dress with belts of basswood bark and sprigs of green balsam on their hats, carrying an assortment of flintlocks, shotguns, rifles, and scythes.
Okay.
Their officers, prefacing orders with please, recoiled in horror as formations of the backwoodsmen zigzagged on command to wheel to the left.
All right.
Okay, so they were nothing.
Right. By the summer of 1862, long after the crisis had subsided, available Canadian volunteers numbered 16,000, 10,615 infantry, 1,615 cavalry, 1,687 artillery, 202 volunteer engineers, besides new corps not yet accepted into service, and the militia. Militia returns for 1862 show 470,000 militiamen in Canada. But with the volunteers, it was not expected to raise more than 100,000 Canadian troops for active service. It was within the context of a generally unprepared Canadian military that military ground plans were formulated. Plans contingent on troops that would not be available until the spring of 1862. Oh, what's going on here?
Well, in short, Canada, they were not prepared for war with the United States. In the war cabinet, there had been disagreement between McDougall, who believed that the Union would suspend the war and turn its full attention to Canada, and Burgoyne, who believed the war would continue. I don't think they're going to suspend the freaking war in their country for a civil war to focus on you fucks.
No.
Both agreed that Canada would face a major ground assault from the United States, an assault that both recognized would be difficult to oppose.